Welcome to the Insights to Communicate podcast with Adam Probalski, where market and opinion research come together with public affairs and PR.
Welcome to the podcast, Brandon Jones. Brandon is the Director of Political Campaigns for the Southern Poverty Law Center and the SPLC Action Fund. I get that right, Brandon?
You got it. That's it.
All right. Perfect. Well, thanks for agreeing to be on the program. I think you got a super interesting background and do like some pretty important work. And so I'd love to hear about that, especially the campaign stuff. But first, let's talk a bit about your history, your journey. You've got an interesting education background, which includes a master's in divinity. You're a lawyer, and now you work for, essentially a nonprofit that, probably doesn't pay you as much as you could probably make out there in the real world. How'd you get here and why you decide to do the work you do?
Yeah, well, Adam, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be a part of this conversation. I've listened to some past episodes and I've noticed some of your guests have an entrepreneurial spirit. I do not. As anybody who's worked with me and as my law partners will attest, that's not been my kind of pathway into this stuff. It's been a bit of a journey. I think the simplest way to talk about my political journey is to say that I was drawn to this stuff as a high school student. When my senior year, me and some buddies put together a political party and ran for the slate of student council offices and knocked off some folks who had those jobs for 3 years. We were really proud of that. So it's my first foray.
Full-on troublemaker.
That's right. And the good people at Pascagoula High School will attest to that. And so I kind of stuck with that as I went into college and really enjoyed student politics, enjoyed student government, and was lucky, went to a school that kind of surprisingly, because it was a private Baptist college, but it surprisingly gave a lot of latitude to the student government to make decisions and had an active Senate. And so really threw myself at that and just really enjoyed problem solving in that way. And had a good friend who's still a good friend who helped run my campaign for student body president. And he and I still talk just about every day. He was an attorney whenever I later ran for the Mississippi House of Representatives. And so, a lot of those early childhood and college connections and student politics had a big impact on me. You mentioned a moment ago, divinity school, faith has been an important part of my life. And I did attend divinity school at Wake Forest University, proud demon deacon. I really used that period of time as a time of, I guess you'd say, vocational discernment. I kind of was still trying to figure out what came next. Happened to get an internship in Washington, D.C. in 2000, pretty important political year. Was living in the congressional apartment building right behind the Supreme Court in the middle of all that Bush-Gore activity.
Yeah.
And so, my story is I went to divinity school and met lawyers and folks who worked in politics, and that's what drew me to law school and to do the work that I do now. I interned for a group called the Baptist Joint Committee on Public Affairs, which is still around, still doing important work on the Hill. And so, from there, moved back home to the Gulf Coast just in time for Hurricane Katrina. Took the bar exam 2 months later. Hurricane Katrina came through. A few months later, my wife and I had our first child. And as people know, that region was decimated. And as a trial lawyer, I was introduced to the wild world of insurance and what that means for property owners and what it means when insurance companies no longer write policies for an entire region. So that issue led me to run for the state house. And so I served in the Mississippi State House. Really interesting time to do that. I have been involved in a lot of close races. I won that primary by 19 votes. I won the general election by 11 votes.
Wow.
And then we had an immediate speakers fight that was decided by 2 votes. Um, sure, some of your listeners will remember Haley Barbour, who's of course still around, still very active. He was our governor at that time,
Sure.
Republican governor, who kind of brought this really advanced, almost military type operation to the state of Mississippi, military efficiency. And I was part, I guess you would say, of the loyal opposition,
Sure.
Democratic House, which was narrowly divided. And so lost re-election, Adam, by 35 votes after serving a 4-year term. Again, another, wow. I'm a walking civics lesson on the importance of, participating in your local elections. And all during this time, practicing law, our legislature is a part-time legislature.
Sure.
But practicing law and thinking about, helping candidates and working on campaigns and kind of did that in a part-time basis, trying to maintain a law practice, and really enjoyed that, by the way. But formed a PAC, worked for candidates, represented candidates, did a lot of voting rights and election law cases, and really fast forwarding, felt lucky a few years back to get an invitation to be a part of the policy team at the Southern Poverty Law Center, and have been excited to build out a political department there, which is still very new. It's the newest part of the organization, which of course has been around for over 50 years. And so it's been exciting to try to think about what does it look like to build nonpartisan races, primarily through the lens of issues that are important to us and looking out for minority representation in local offices across the Deep South.
That's great. I really like local government, partly because that's where our business often lies, but also it's kind of this secret place where there's billions of dollars and high connectivity to the people they serve, and it just doesn't get the attention. It's not as sexy as legislature or Congress, but I think that's great that you have a focus there because you can really accomplish big things. And it seems, I assume you're in the same boat, it seems like it's the place where you build the bench.
That's exactly right. I mean, there's some kind of practical, strategical considerations that led us there. As you said, there's not a lot of groups like ours that are providing support for local candidates or first-time candidates. So that was exciting to us because, we weren't really having to elbow people out of the way. This was a wide open space, and people are typically happy to have some support if they're running in their first race. Or
I just to put a point on that, you're not bucking up against Emily's List or Club for Growth in the city council race in Jackson.
That's right. We work with a lot of coalition groups in all the states where we are, and they seem to be pretty happy with us because we're not doing anything that competes with them. They're like, yeah, sure, if you want to help out this city councilor, that's great. So that's a piece of it. And then to the other point you made, there is so much of what happens in our lives that is governed by these folks who represent us at this very local level. And so we've spent a ton of time researching what these local offices are, trying to get to know that landscape, and trying to get people more plugged into that, because I'm sure as many of your listeners know, oftentimes the decisions that have the largest impact, whether it be on your wallet or on your rights, is happening right there in your backyard. And so that's another reason that we've chosen to focus on local races.
I love that. So functionally, how does that work? You find a place that you want to spend more time because you think that needs some fixing, or you find the right candidate and you want to help them. So that's how you get involved. And then what does that look like? What does the campaign fund actually do to engage and help support a candidate?
Yeah, it's worth noting, you mentioned at the top, I work across different entities and they have different types of compliance that they have to do. And so When we talk about getting involved in these local races, that is primarily through a C4, the SPLC Action Fund.
Okay.
And through that entity, we endorse candidates primarily. And we also, that's the entity that we use to lobby state legislatures across the Southeast. And then over in the, we have a independent expenditure PAC, which is the new Southern majority. And through that, we run IE campaigns, independent expenditure campaigns on behalf of local candidates. Now, we were talking about a minute ago, there's not a lot of competition in helping local candidates generally. There's not a whole lot at all, particularly on the progressive side, for running independent expenditure campaigns on behalf of these candidates. So that's been a lot of fun. And of course, when you're running independent campaigns, it enables you to move around, be kind of nimble. You're by law not interacting with the candidate.
Right.
So you're able to kind of come in and run different programs. But for us, it all starts with research. And as I mentioned a moment ago, we kind of, as folks who work in this area and who have observed American elections know, you can predict a lot about how a region is going to vote based on race. That's particularly true in the South.
Yeah.
And so we start with a racial analysis of various districts. And what we try to look out for are these local, county, and municipal races where you have an appreciable Black voting age population, but decades of white local elected leadership. And we kind of start there by taking a closer look to see why that might be the case. Is that, there's sometimes a community-centered reason for that. And then there are sometimes just a lack of mobilization and voter education that informs, how politics has gotten to be that way. So, it probably won't surprise anyone who's familiar with us that the SPLC Action Fund kind of starts out looking through this racial lens at how local politics and how local power is being distributed. And then we pick the places where we operate based on that criteria, and then build out from there based on, where the opportunities are.
So you talk about research, which I assume you're talking about, right, demographic and local policies. Tell me about how you, in your campaigns, you use polling or your focus groups or other kind of public opinion research.
Yeah, it varies. And sometimes, as you know, getting a good tool into a particularly local area can be a challenge. So we've tried a variety of different things. I'll give you an example that's fairly recent. There's a new congressional district. People might be aware that in some states here recently, there's been new congressional districts carved out by the court system. One of those is the new Alabama Congressional District 2. And that's kind of geographically centered in Montgomery, Alabama, which is where our headquarters happens to be. But it also goes all the way down to the coast into the Mobile area. So what we did there, it's a huge primary. And if anybody Googles it now, you'll see this is a hotly contested race, and a lot of state legislators, a lot of other folks are involved in it. Well, what we did was we took some of the issues that we work on the most and polled likely voters there to get a sense for where they were and what issues were really moving voters, and published that very early in the campaign in hopes that sharing this information with the world would encourage some of these candidates to build their campaigns around the issues that matter most. Because we are nonpartisan, because we do care about issues primarily, not partisanship, we thought this is a great opportunity to kind of get the word out on what appears to be moving these voters, and hope that the campaigns will be responsive. And as a continuation of that, we're hosting a forum for these candidates later this month in Montgomery at the Civil Rights Memorial Center. All in service to try to sussing some of this stuff out and try to encourage people to run campaigns that we think would be responsive to this stuff. And so that's an example of, some of the ways we've used polling. We've also used focus groups to test how parents might be responding to local school board decisions.
Yeah.
How local policies are landing with people. And then we've done more of what I guess you would consider your sort of basic polling of just kind of horse race and where folks are at a given snapshot in time on political figures.
I love that first use case where you kind of use your elevated, a little bit out of the weeds position to kind of help couch the issues and what's important. And I think that's super smart and a great use of resources. Because I think in a lot of cases, candidates don't necessarily have that data, and they're fighting some fight that doesn't need to be fought. Some culture war fight or something else that they can really, hey, this is what people are caring about. All right, they're caring about roads and homelessness and schools, and you get to come home here and have that policy fight. You don't have to be out in the ether, talking about the crazy stuff. That's really cool.
No, you're exactly right. I think, we would like to do more of that. I think moving forward, that's going to be the type of research we try to do on the front end so that we can kind of urge candidates to come to us rather than us going out and trying to, pick the best available option.
Right.
Because you're right. I mean, that information is not readily available to you just because you decided to run for office. And sometimes even the best intentioned candidate needs to get sort of that context of where people are. And you can sometimes just by putting that information out there, lead people to be more responsible in the way they build these things out so that they don't step off assuming that, hey, I need to play to the reactionary, base or whatever the case may be.
I love it. All right, so let's dive back a little bit back into your history and mentor or mentors. Is there someone? I suspect there's somebody out there that you definitely were influenced by that we should know about.
I feel really lucky to have had many. I just think across the course of my life, and I've always had people with more experience who were smarter, who saw the angles better than I did, who were willing to take time with me. And it's been a huge part of my life. And it's something that I've tried to emulate for people who are interested in this work. And so really there are dozens. I mean, I have to say my parents and I did not begin politically aligned. And a guy who is the political director for the SPLC Action Fund, it might not surprise your listeners to know that he and his Southern Baptist dad didn't see things exactly the same way growing up. But it was a huge thing in my life to have parents who were okay with debate and who were okay with their kids landing in places philosophically and politically that they might not be in. And, we don't see a lot of that in the world. I was very grateful to have the freedom to kind of feel those things out. And that was a huge, piece of the puzzle for me. But then I had professors and teachers and political figures. I'll name a couple of them that come to mind. One of them is the dean of my divinity school, a guy named Bill Leonard, who he's a church historian, and church history, like other history, tells the story of division and coalition and how we moved. It's surprisingly political for folks who might not have studied it. But his way of taking in and shaping our divinity school class and helping us to think more broadly about what vocation might mean for people who care about their faith or trying to be helpful within their community was really important to me. And he and I talk every week, texted mostly about our beloved Demon Deacons and their, victories or problems on the basketball court, but also just about stuff that I'm evaluating from a political standpoint, because he's just been a wonderful friend and mentor. And so I mentioned Bill Leonard. I would also mention William Winter, former governor of Mississippi, who's now passed away, who was really considered our education governor. Came and picked me up from the state capitol during one of my early weeks there, because he was afraid I was about to make a stupid vote. I don't know who told him that I was about to do that. He took me to lunch, sat me down. Our first conversation was him saying, I think you might be inclined to do this because you think it's a good thing, but I think it'll end you right off the bat. And so that developed into a relationship that we sustained over the years, and a lot of lunches, a lot of coffees, a lot of sitting at his house. And those are two, just in my mind, giants who were incredible. There are countless others, Adam, but those are two that come to mind. And again, this process of befriending people who are new to something, this idea of helping them along and letting them ride with you and learn from you. I've just seen the value in that, and encourage everybody who's in this work to help people who are trying to get into it.
I love that. It's a big part of my success, the people that gave me a boost in this world, and just the insight that they offer, and those, you know, random lunches and coffees, or just a meeting or a phone call. I think it's hard to, because it's not very quantifiable specifically. And so I think it's sometimes hard for, one of my concerns is young people to understand the value of those kind of relationships and how to develop them, and how to kind of be accepting of that kind of help and support. Because I think some people think, oh, I'm supposed to do this all on my own. How do you communicate that to because you probably interact with a lot of young people, a lot of people that are wanting to get into this business, or just in general public policy. How do you communicate that, hey, this is an organic process, and it's not transactional, and you should seek out and you know, help and seek out how to help others in that way?
You know, so I'm in my mid 40s, so I'm like an elder in this process. You know, most of the people I work with are a lot younger than me. What I have found helpful, so many people in politics move around with outsized egos, and they lead with bravado and this stuff that, you know, those of us who've been around a little while know matters very little. Right. And so I actually have found it helpful to kind of start from a place of humility and kind of highlight those places where I get it wrong, where the group brings something to the table. You know, I try to look for those opportunities, and I really, you have to be deliberate about this because it doesn't happen by accident, but I try to look for those opportunities to expose people to processes or to tasks or programs that they haven't had a chance to run before, and let them do it. We can become just paralyzed with analysis, and I work with a lot of smart people, and what I've learned about really smart people is that they can sometimes just overthink everything. And in political spaces, we all know speed kills. I mean, you need to be moving at a pace. Right. And so I have tried to create an environment where team members know it's okay to mess up. It's okay if we're by our very nature taking on tough assignments. We're taking on tough races. We're working in hostile environments. So it's not going to be, you know, win after win after win. It's going to be challenging, and so you kind of have to find those people who have a comfort level with that type of challenge and who are okay with it. And so, yeah, I mean, bringing people in by sharing about failure, by sharing about challenge, by sharing about, hey, try something. I'd rather see you try something than not, has been very effective for me. And then, you know, you just have to put that time commitment in. I think I heard someone say that culture eats strategies breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I remember rolling my eyes at that because I thought, no, it's all about having the angles and having the strategy. After working as part of teams on political campaigns, I've come to realize, well, and then also, by the way, as a small business person and in a law firm, culture is key. I mean, if you don't have the culture piece right, you don't even get to strategy. If people aren't communicating, if there's not a comfort level, if people don't feel comfortable using their skills, none of the other stuff matters. But all that stuff takes time. So as leaders, you know, I've realized I have to carve out time to talk to folks. I have to carve out time to talk to this new member of the team, or someone who's trying to break in, or perhaps someone who's newly elected to a post. You have to take that time just to make yourself available and to, you know, develop that relationship. And that, I try to work that in almost like I would any other part of the job. Like, look at that as being just as important as the technical aspect of what you do, as the fundraising piece of what you do and as the electioneering is to try to look at that relationship building as part and parcel of that. Because if you don't have that, the other stuff just doesn't matter.
That's awesome. I love that. All right, before we wrap, let's talk about your tech stack. What do you do every day? What apps do you use? How do you do your actual physical work? Are you using a legal pad? Are you using Google Docs? Are you dictating? As a former law firm owner, tell us about how you work.
A combination of all of it. We've, I think I've had to modify based on what works best for the team. And, so we use things like Airtable, we use things like Teams, we use things, like Google Chat and different things to kind of communicate throughout the day. I'm a consummate list maker. I mean, for me, a big book that came out not too long ago really was the Checklist Manifesto.
Okay.
And so this idea of how you make checklists and how you use them, and that's just on your standard whiteboard. So I have a whiteboard at my home, I have a couple at the office. I start out Monday morning by marking those things up and then transferring it to Trello or to Airtable, depending on what's a group project or not. And then, of course, married to the Microsoft suite of calendars and communication tools.
Very cool. I have a whiteboard in my office. It doesn't get used as much as it probably should, but that's a cool. I've never heard anybody talk about that kind of like whiteboard it out and then put it on the digital tool. That's a great way of doing it. I like that a lot. All right. So personal motto, words to live by. What comes to mind?
There was a U.S. Treasury Secretary not too long ago who, during the financial crisis, popularized the phrase "plan beats no plan." Tim Geithner said that, and I thought that was a great kind of summary of in political work how we should move, and it kind of goes back to that thing I said a moment ago about not allowing the perfect to be the enemy of the good, but also to try to move deliberately. So this idea of having some notion of why you're doing what you're doing, to have some plan going into it, not necessarily the perfect plan, but we find oftentimes that, if you show up in a space and you have a plan, and your opposition hasn't maybe been as thoughtful about how they're moving as you've been, that can be the key to success in these political contests. So plan beats no plan is a big one for me.
I love it. Brandon Jones, thanks a million for being with me. I appreciate it very much.
This was great. Thanks, Adam.
This has been Insights to Communicate with Adam Probalski, president of the woman and Latina-owned market and opinion research firm, Probalski Research.